Welcome to another video in our series where we're sharing insights on mortgage secondary markets with sales teams. In our previous video, we discussed the primary versus secondary markets, explained the variable role of a secondary team, and introduced important concepts such as day one margin, interest rate risk, and some important considerations around hedging. This video will be building on that information, so if you didn't already watch the previous video, consider going back and checking it out. Before we dive deeper into secondary market, I want to talk about the phases of the mortgage process through the lens of the secondary team. Hopefully this video will start shedding some light on questions such as, what is secondary doing behind the curtain? Why does it seem like secondary is micromanaging locks? Why are lenders sometimes slow to offer certain loan programs? And how can secondary hedge a pipeline if they can't predict the future market moves? So let's get started. Throughout the entire loan origination process, as well as after closing, secondary is involved in some capacity. But the degree of secondary's involvement is often very dependent on the phase of the loan process. To look at things from secondary's perspective, we're going to break the mortgage process into the application phase, the lock phase, and the closed loan phase. The application phase will describe when a customer applies for a loan but hasn't locked in their rate yet. The lock phase describes any active lock, including those before application and until closing. And the closed loan phase will describe the period after a loan successfully closes and funds. We'll also discuss some of the things that secondary is involved in on an ongoing basis that can impact the sales team's business. As we look at these phases from the lens of the secondary team, keep in mind that for lenders who internally hedge their locks, which is what we're focused on in this series, secondary's chief responsibilities to the organization are to manage interest rate risk and to capture and maintain the company's target margins so the lender can continue doing business and remain competitive. How involved secondary is at any given time usually depends on how much interest rate risk or margin risk is inherently present. All right, with that in mind, let's start looking at the loan origination process through the lens of the secondary team, beginning with the application phase. When a borrower applies for a loan, secondary is often only passively involved unless the sales team specifically requests they review a deal. They usually aren't monitoring or actively managing specific loans in the application pipeline. They will, however, likely monitor the overall volume of daily applications so they can anticipate potential lock volume, and they'll likely be monitoring the volume of unlocked or floating loans that are moving through the milestones, since these can present interest rate risk if suddenly locked in a volatile market, especially for those lenders offering overnight lock protection. There may also be circumstances where they'll closely monitor the volume of application on certain product types if there's a secondary market-related reason, like in 2021 when the agency suddenly capped the volume of second home and investment properties that lenders could originate without penalty. But overall, while secondary may be keeping an eye on the application pipeline, you may have noticed that you generally won't interact with the secondary team much during this application phase. This, of course, is in stark contrast to the lock phase. The lock phase is basically go time for the secondary team. This is when they should be fully engaged in watching every individual lock in the pipeline for things like inactivity, approaching expiration, margin reductions, and more. Before we dive into that, though, let's briefly define a mortgage lock. A mortgage lock refers to an agreement between a borrower and a lender to secure a specific interest rate during the mortgage process, protecting the borrower from potential increases in prevailing interest rates. The lock only protects the borrower. There's no benefit to the lender other than protecting the interests of their customers. If interest rates improve after the lock date, the borrower has the right to request a renegotiation of the locked rate, or they can cancel the loan and lock with another lender. If rates worsen, however, the borrower gets to keep their rate and the lender is exposed to any reductions to the loan's value. This has important implications for the secondary team's management of the lender's margins and profitability. While there are minimal requirements around the timing of locking a loan, most customers will choose to lock their loan early in the process, typically around the time of application. However, locks can sometimes be established before a full application, or sometimes they'll be locked very late in the process. For example, there are some customers who will choose to wait until later in the process to lock their loan if they think interest rates are likely to improve. The process where applications are progressing through the milestones without being locked is called floating. Locks can either enter into the lender's internally hedged pipeline or lock best efforts with an approved agency or investor. Lenders with an internally hedged position will be responsible for managing the interest rate risk on the locks themselves, often in concert with third-party hedge analytics providers who will be providing modeling services and hedge reporting and may even be trading the position on the lender's behalf. Secondary teams use extensive reporting to monitor locks for stalled progress, inactivity, expiration, extensions, pull-through stats, concessions, data mismatches, and more. This allows them to identify and proactively address any issues that can impact hedge performance, margin, or loan saleability on the secondary market. Many loan officers will be familiar with their secondary and lock teams reaching out about some of these findings and may even find this communication annoying. But it's important because it ensures active loans aren't being allowed to expire, avoids hedge costs on dead deals, and prevents inaccurate hedging. Keep in mind, hedging failures can be a major source of margin reduction for lenders and contribute to missed revenue targets. To be able to accurately hedge a pipeline, most lenders utilize hedge modeling provided by third-party hedge advisors. While models can provide great analytics, it's secondary's responsibility to provide extremely close oversight of the model and identify and address any issues with hedge performance. It's also secondary's responsibility to make model recommendations to accommodate business practices that the hedge advisor may not be aware of. So there is usually a lot of communication between secondary and their hedge advisor during the lock phase. If the lender handles hedging in-house, secondary will be actively balancing out the position daily and timing their trades to occur around incoming locks, loan sales, and changing market conditions. However, even if a lender utilizes a third party to trade the position or handle loan sales, secondary is still responsible for overseeing the process and making sure everything executes within the parameters of the organization's strategies. Secondary will also be enforcing lock policies during the lock phase, which are critical for optimizing hedge performance and mitigating margin losses. Since the lock phase is where the company is exposed to significant interest rate risk and potential for margin reductions, this is an area of maximal priority for secondary. But admittedly, so far it probably sounds like it's all about the lender's profits and financial security or secondary's P&L. So why should sales teams want a secondary team who is seemingly micromanaging the pipeline? If locks lose too much margin or if the hedge position results in financial losses, one of the primary ways it impacts loan officers is that margin will often be built into the rate sheets to make up for some of the losses on future volume. This can lead to loan officers being exposed to inconsistent pricing and periods of lost competitiveness. There may also be whiplash with periods of concessions being freely granted to suddenly restricted, or certain loan products may be offered and then abruptly removed. This lack of consistency introduces unnecessary frustration into the sales team's business that could otherwise be avoided. Lock phase losses can also lead to the company having less available funds for reinvestments and initiatives around technology and marketing, or even lead to operational staff reductions that can impact turn times and operational effectiveness. Finally, when hedge losses are significant, and especially if they're catastrophic, it can put the entire organization at risk. However, when secondary is on point during this phase and effectively managing risk and margins, it will help them capture the revenue needed to boost the sales team's business across the board. Before we move on to closed loans, I want to make one more extremely important point. Margin losses during the lock phase will usually dwarf any potential improved execution when loans are sold. So secondary trying to focus efforts on improved execution to make up for losses sustained through poor hedge performance and excessive margin reductions is rarely a good strategy. Instead, lenders and sales teams benefit most from secondary optimizing management of the lock phase. Now let's switch gears and look at secondary's role during the closed loan phase. The vast majority of closed loans get sold into the secondary market, although some may stay in the lender's portfolio. Until loans are delivered into the secondary market, they'll continue to be hedged against interest rate risk. Beyond managing ongoing interest rate risk, secondary's main goal during the closed loan phase is to find the best possible price and execution for each loan within the parameters of the organization's short and long-term strategies. Secondary will be carefully evaluating each loan throughout the sale and delivery process, checking for any bid discrepancies during the loan sale, as well as monitoring each loan for any reduction to margin during the shipping and delivery process due to purchase delays or failed delivery. Secondary will often need to assist with resolving any delivery issues as well. If loans fail to be saleable through typical means due to loan defects or early defaults, secondary will be hitting their network hard to find the best scratch and dent bid and will attempt to limit the loss to the organization on these loans, which can be sizable. For lenders who securitize, secondary will be responsible for pulling and delivering securities and ensuring they get maximal execution. Finally, many capital markets departments will also be involved with servicing, post-closing, and portfolio management, so their role will often extend beyond the initial sale or delivery of loans. So how does secondary's role during the closed loan phase affect the sales teams? As we mentioned before, the more revenue the lender captures at sale, the more likely they are to meet their target revenue, which will keep rate sheet pricing consistent and competitive. It also means the lender will have more capital to reinvest in the company, hopefully making the lender more competitive and allowing sales teams to win more deals. Now that we talked about secondary's role during the specific phases of the loan process, let's talk about some of the things secondary is involved with on an ongoing basis. First, secondary is obviously responsible for producing the rate sheets that loan officers use to quote their borrowers. There are several ways they can derive raw rate sheet pricing, which we'll talk about in a separate video. Secondary will also be involved with creating pricing strategies geared towards meeting the lender's target margins to ensure profitability, as well as any strategic initiatives towards the lender's customer base. This can include adjusting margins on any or all products to increase competitiveness, make up lost revenue, or less commonly, to slow production if the lender doesn't have the operational capacity. Secondary is also heavily involved with establishing the programs and products lenders offer. These are usually based on the lender's risk tolerances, agency approvals, lending partnerships, customer base, and marketing strategies. From secondary's perspective, the top priority with each product and program offering is to proactively consider anything that could introduce risks that would either impact the lender's ability to sell a loan into the secondary market or present hedging challenges that need to be proactively addressed. If these risks aren't anticipated and proactively managed, these products can expose the company to significant financial risk and hedge losses. Secondary's evaluation of these risks and how they could impact the company may heavily influence if the loan program or product ultimately gets rolled out, and if it does, the timing of the rollout. It may also impact how strict or lenient the program guidelines are and if any additional fees are added to account for the risk. This is why lenders who offer similar programs may have very different program parameters based on the lender's risk appetite and secondary's ability to manage the risk. However, a thorough risk evaluation may also benefit loan officers by ensuring the company doesn't roll out programs too quickly and without proper controls in place. If the lender sustains losses they weren't anticipating, it's very common for programs to quickly be shut down completely, potentially impacting the LO's business. Secondary will also be closely monitoring the markets and keeping an eye on market-related news. However, it's not usually for the purpose of trying to predict future market conditions. Instead, secondary is actively monitoring for and anticipating anything that could create market volatility and impact the timing of their trades and loan sales. They also want to be aware of overall market conditions so they can communicate any market-related pricing discrepancies to sales teams and help businesses make decisions on selling strategies. Secondary may also produce market color that can be used to keep sales teams informed or be shared with referral partners and customers to provide education and resources that may help generate leads and future business. However, if you ask secondary what's going to happen to rates in the future, usually they'll give you an honest, I have no idea. In a global economy, there are nearly an unlimited number of pressures influencing market conditions that could directly or indirectly impact mortgage rates at any given time. So trying to accurately and consistently predict future rates or anticipate future origination volume is nearly impossible, which can lead to the question, how can you accurately hedge a position if you can't predict what rates are going to do? In an upcoming video, we're going to differentiate between hedging and speculative trading, but the important distinction is that hedging involves actively balancing a position based on current market conditions, not trading a position based on what rates may do in the future. Finally, secondary will be managing all their primary and secondary marketing relationships on an ongoing basis, including with the agencies, correspondent partners, broker-dealers, warehouse facilities, and more, who are all critical to the lender's ability to do business. Establishing and maintaining these secondary marketing relationships can be extremely time-consuming, especially if the lender has a significant number of partnerships. But these relationships can also have a big impact on the lender's overall revenue and profitability, as well as their competitiveness and lending capacity. So this is another critical function of the secondary role. While we didn't cover every single responsibility of a secondary team in this video, hopefully this peek behind the curtain into secondary's role throughout the origination process provided some valuable insights. Since most of secondary's role will either directly or indirectly impact loan officers and the sales teams, understanding not only what secondary is doing, but why they're doing it will hopefully be beneficial. Ultimately, secondary's job is to fulfill their responsibilities to the organization around managing interest rate risk and margins, while also ensuring sales teams are successful and able to win deals. If sales and secondary can maintain a great dialogue and collaborate on efforts to limit excessive margin reductions and avoid practices that introduce undue interest rate risk, secondary will be able to keep pricing consistent and competitive so the sales team's business can thrive. Thank you for watching our video. We introduced a lot of concepts and definitions in this video, like some of the participants in the secondary market, interest rate risk, hedging, rate sheet pricing, locks, and more, all of which we're going to explore in much more detail in upcoming videos.